Here's a guy who thinks God needs to exist for any belief to be justified.
Worthy of being made fun of.
Okay, dude.
Do you have an argument?
I was going to ask you a sincere question.
Okay, what's the argument?
What use is your faith, given that you will suffer and die under the human condition like every other person who ever walked this earth?
This is your high tier, high IQ atheist argument?
It's a question about why you choose faith over reason.
Yeah, I don't. So you don't even understand my position. You have no idea what you're talking about. I believe that revelation is... So he's not going to let me talk. He's just going to yap. I believe that divine revelation is the ground of reason. So that's totally different from what you're arguing.
If you believe that revelation is the ground of reason, then you're starting with revelation rather than starting with reason. If revelation is the ground of reason, you forfeit reason as a means of evaluating which of the many scriptures which purport to be revelations are the accurate ones, if any.
So you don't accept that faith is a somehow an epistemic justifier?
No, revelation is the epistemic justifier for logic and reasoning.
So what justifies revelation? If you're not using reason to evaluate the reliability of revelation, which you can't do if you base reasoning on revelation, then how are you not taking the reliability of revelation on faith?
How so?
With the transcendental argument, the very thing I argued to Yaron Brooks in that debate.
Sorry. So, all right. I'm sorry. Distraction. Yeah, so you what does your faith offer you? What is your belief in?
Well, for one, it offers a justification for the possibility of reasoning at all.
No, it doesn't. This is the presuppositionalist argument, which says that reasoning can only be considered reliable if there is a perfect, infallible God who keeps 2 + 2 from equaling 5. Folks who make this argument think that without a God, contradictions could be true and tautologies could be false. That doesn't make any sense.
The possibility of reasoning is not really something that's in need of that type of justification.
Oh, well, how do you know that? Tell me what epistemic justification is.
The laws of logic are rules that describe what we seem to be able to make sense of and what we seem to not be able to make sense of. I believe, for example, that the law of non-contradiction is true because when I try to make sense of something both existing and not existing at the same time and in the same respect, I find that I can't. I will continue to believe it for as long as that is the case. In fact, I won't be able to help but believe it because I can't even understand what it would mean for it to not be true. That's all the justification I see any need for.
So which part of it you want to know?
Well, you said it's not necessary. It doesn't apply to that. Then you would know then what epistemic justification is and where it applies. So tell me.
Yeah. So epistemic justification is about the positive grounds of knowledge.
Right. So what's the positive grounds for believing in reason?
I'm not sure if he means positive in the sense of the opposite of negative, or positive in the sense of positivism, the epistemic view that knowledge is obtained through reason and evidence. My justification for believing in reason is that I can't understand what it would mean for the laws of logic to be incorrect. Therefore, I can't help but believe that they are true. I understand that the fact that I can't understand how reason could fail to be valid isn't proof that it is, but it's as convincing a justification as I can think of.
Well, we can go through the relationship of perception to abstraction, and which one precedes which.
How do you know that perception relates to abstractions at all?
Because you can create abstractions based on perceptions. Economics, for example, is an abstraction based on what we perceive to be desires, scarcity, patterns of behavior, etc. The idea of an economy is an abstraction invented to describe things we can directly perceive, like resources and human activity with relation to those resources. That's the relationship.
Because of the logic. First of all, there's a logical relation, but there's also...
No, but I asked you how you know there's a relation. You said there's a logical relation. I'm asking you how you know that. To tell me there's a relation doesn't tell me how you know that.
I'm convinced of it because I can see it directly.
Because you started to discuss self-evidencies before.
Oh,
right?
Interesting. So how do we know what's self-evident?
So for me...
for you. So it's not universal, it's just for you, it's subjective?
No. What I think is the correct term that applies to everyone is my premise. I think you know the difference.
How do you know it's self-evident?
So I was going to say, so what is self-evident is related to direct experience. We don't justify direct experience.
Oh, says who? So I can just claim anything as so I can just claim anything as direct experience and I don't have to justify it.
Well, that depends on whether you're trying to convince someone else. When I say that I believe in logic because I don't understand what it would mean for the rules of logic to be false, I'm just explaining what convinces me that logic works. I'm not trying to convince anyone else. If someone says that they're not convinced that the law of non-contradiction is true because they can conceive of true contradictions, I'll ask for an example, and if that example doesn't convince me, then I'll just agree to disagree. They are under no obligation to justify their belief to me.
So God is direct experience for me, and I don't have to justify it. Would you accept that?
Yes, it wouldn't convince me that a God exists, but I wouldn't tell you that your belief is unacceptable. What would be the point?
I would say that the term God is meaningless, that anyone who wants to use it as a theoretical object would have to lay out their argument for what.
So what's your answer to Hume? Okay, then what's your answer to Hume's skepticism?
In what regard? You mean like
you're saying that you just follow your perception. You follow your perception of that relates somehow to abstractions. What's the justification that any perception relates to anything at all?
I believe that perceptions relate to abstractions because I can compose abstractions on the basis of perceptions. You might say that this whole process could be hallucinatory or a mistaken understanding, but that's true if a God exists as well. So what difference does the existence of God make?
Process, in my view of justification, it would be arbitrary to dismiss the basis of abstracted from experience of the relationship of something to its pattern. In other words,
that's just begging the question that there is a pattern. So that there's a pattern presupposes that you're perceiving accurately information in the external world. I'm asking for the justification for that.
Again, even if there is a God, it's clearly possible to misperceive information from the external world, so God doesn't help with this problem.
You said it's self-evident. How do we know that?
I've already said, because there's nothing else to ground it. In other words...
So that's also a fallacy that you claim that you're not aware of anything else to ground it doesn't mean that it's grounded. How do you know that?
No, what I'm saying, I can go on to say that when we start to analyze concepts, if we in fact have a system for determining what's a concept, right? We can see.
How do you know the system is accurate? You're just telling me all these different things, like you're asserting all this stuff. What's the system that analyzes?
Let's say there is a God who reveals truth to us. How do you know you're accurately identifying which of the many scriptures which purport to be revelations from God are the real ones? And even if you do correctly identify which scriptures are genuine revelation, how do you know you're accurately interpreting what they mean? Even if there is a God who reveals truth to us, we're still stuck with the fact that we are fallible and can be mistaken about anything. Even if there is a God who gives us revelation, you are still capable of mistakenly dismissing genuine revelation as fake, accepting fake revelation as real, and misinterpreting what the revelation is revealing. The existence of God gets us no closer to epistemic certainty.
Because the reference, the content of the words reduced to a perceptual reference. And so when I...
Have you ever read Wittgenstein? You don't know how silly this argument is.
I didn't do the subtitles in the original video, by the way. I know Wittgenstein isn't spelled Wittgenstein.
How do you reduce numbers to perceptions?
Well, I draw a mental line around, for example, some clump of matter, and I label it as one such clump of matter. For example, I'll look at a clump of sandstone and label that one rock. I might pair it with some other clump of matter, which is non-contiguous with the first, and say I have two rocks, etc. This is always somewhat arbitrary. I could say that the two rocks are one pair of rocks, or I could weigh them and say I have several hundred grams of rock. Or to show that I can build abstractions based on empirical perceptions, I could invent a whole new unit of measurement and calculate how many of those units I have. I'll do whichever is most useful for whatever end I'm trying to achieve by counting these things.
Where in your perception is the number 7?
In my perception of whatever I've counted to a total of 7. Not only do many abstractions have a basis in perception, they have no ontology at all independent of some variety of experience.
Very simple, very simple. The concept 1 is synonymous and reduces to the concept entity. We perceive bounded particulars directly.
We perceive non-contiguity, if that's what he means by bounded particulars, but as I explained previously, when we're counting things, we don't have to count bounded particulars. There are lots of ways to count things. When we count how many gallons of gas we're putting into our car, we're not counting bounded particulars.
How do you know that you perceive bounded particulars?
To me,
it's not quite clear what he's asking here. If he's asking, how do you know that your perception is accurate, then the answer is that you don't for sure. But since we're fallible whether there's a God or not, it's irrelevant to the issue of God's existence. If he's asking the more phenomenological question of how do you know you're having such a perception, without regard to the perception's accuracy, then I think believing that you're having a perception is the same as having the perception. I don't know how you could think you're having a perception without having the perception. That seems to me to be the fundamental nature of a perception. If that's what he's asking, it's like asking, how do you know you're in pain? You can be mistaken about the source of the pain, like if you have phantom limb pain, but I don't see how you could be mistaken about the pain itself.
What is the epistemic justification for saying that you perceive bound to particulars?
In other words, the epistemic justification must terminate in perception because you cannot get underneath that.
So, in other words, because it must be. So it's a dogmatic assertion that you can't justify.
If I think I'm having a perception, I don't understand what it would mean to be mistaken about that. Therefore, I can't help but believe that I am, in fact, having a perception. Since I don't know how to dislodge that belief, I'm going to believe it whether I have any further justification or not. Since that's the case, the existence or non-existence of any further justification is completely inconsequential. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.